and welcome to today's live chat. And today is the 80th anniversary. 80 years ago today, Mussolini was deposed. And I thought that makes a very good topical conversation piece for today's live broadcast. The reason, obviously, we're all hoping that some other fascist dictator is going to be deposed. Having said that, if you're watching this on the hope that you may actually learn something about the deposition, getting rid of a fascist dictator, then unfortunately the way that Mussolini was deposed will not get rid of Putin at all. And that is because, believe it or not, there were more checks and balances on Mussolini than there are today on Putin. But there's lots of very similar things between the two of them. Mussolini came to power. He'd been in power for more than 20 years. He came to power in the early 1920s. It took him a fair while, like it took Putin a while to consolidate his dictatorship. Unlike Putin, of course, Putin did win a general election. He was voted into power. He was granted power, then he won an election. But unlike Mussolini, like Hitler, never actually won an election. It was Mussolini who gave the word fascism, and it was he also was one of his opponents who gave the word totalitarianismo, which came from him when it was a journalist who asked him if he wanted to take the totality of power, and so that's how that word comes. Mussolini, like Putin, had started several wars. The most vicious, I would have to say, is probably the war in Abyssinia, a country where Somalia, or part of Somalia was then divided into British Somalia, which is in the north, and Italian Somalia, or Somaliland, which was in the east. And so on the 29th of February 1896, at the Battle of Adwa, the Abyssinians had defeated the Italians. Indeed, that's the only time when the native peoples had actually defeated a European power. I know there were battles, such as, for example, Isandlwana, where the Zulus beat the British in 1879, but there were no wars where the locals actually defeated the Europeans. The reason for this was the Europeans had superior technology to that which the local indigenous people in Africa actually had. But the Italians were defeated in there, but Mussolini had to have another crack at Abyssinia, and 40 years later, that's precisely what he did, and he conquered the country. But he conquered the country using weapons, chemical weapons. He used gas. Is possibly as many as 250,000 Ethiopians in 1941, largely retaken by. It was retaken largely by British troops. Mussolini entered the Second World War as Hitler's jackal. He declared war on France and Britain in the aftermath of the defeat of France, or as France was just about to be defeated. And he later declared war on Greece, seeing Greece as being an easy target. And the thing was, though, by 1943, the whole thing was crashing down around him. He had sent Italian expeditionary force to the Soviet Union, which had been largely wiped out in the aftermath of the attack around Stalingrad. In North Africa, the British chased the Italians out of Libya, their colony, the end of 1942, and by the May 1943, Tunisia, which was the last bridgehead in Africa, had fallen as well. A defeat similar to that of Stalingrad in terms of losses for the Axis. Sicily was attacked on the 10th of July 1943, and it was occupied in a 5-week campaign. Now, by the time of the landings in Sicily, Mussolini realized that the game was up, and he decided he had to speak to his mate Adolf Hitler. However, in the meantime, there were some people trying to get rid of Mussolini and put something like a General Badoglio, in his place. And Hitler actually got wind of this via Mussolini, and it was Hitler who, via Himmler, not via Mussolini. The security services, was Eugen Dolman, who informed Himmler that there was being an attempted coup against Mussolini. Hitler requested a meeting, and Hitler and Mussolini met at a place. It's often called the meeting at Feltre, although the meeting wasn't held at Feltre. It was held at a place called Belluno. Belluno is quite clear to Feltre anyway, and it was held in a property called Via Gaggia. And Via Gaggia, I just looked it up now on Google Maps to see if it still stands, and yes, it's still there. So this meeting was held, and so it was meant to be over 3 days, and the people around Mussolini pressed him to say he has to get out of this alliance with the Nazis. And so the two of them meet. Hitler goes ranting off for 2 hours, which is the sort of thing you normally do, not allowing Mussolini to get a word in edgeways. Mussolini spoke German, so he didn't have to speak via an interpreter. But he was clearly ill, and he didn't really want to do it. There was a dinner break or lunch break. There was strong pressure on Mussolini to actually say something to Hitler, get out of this alliance. But maybe it was like Mussolini was thinking, well, Hitler can give us some more troops to defend the south with. Anyway. The upshot of it all was that Mussolini felt he couldn't take another a couple of hours having Hitler ranting at him, telling him it was just a matter of willpower and strength, and if you've got to have the desire to stand up and fight, etc., etc. And so he said that he just felt ill. So Hitler. He went back to the railway station with Hitler, and then he got on his plane. He flew his plane back himself. He was a pilot, and as he was flying back, he saw that he had been informed during the meeting with Hitler about the bombing attack on Rome, and now he could actually see it for himself. And this seems to have frightened the people around Mussolini, so much so that they realized that they had to act. Now, there was something called the Fascist Grand Council. The Fascist Grand Council was set up in December 1922. Its first meeting was in January 1923, and the objective of the Fascist Grand Council was to talk about things which were relevant to the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister being Mussolini, the head of state, effectively was the king. Now, the Fascist Grand Council met around nearly 200 times. The last meeting, though, had been some 3.5 years. Not September. It was March 1939. It had been the last meeting. And the reason that they had stopped, because they sort of replaced its general talking functions with another organization. So that's why it hadn't met. It wasn't anything sinister that decided to meet after 3.5 years. And indeed, it appears that it was Mussolini himself who agreed to a meeting of the Grand Council. Now, by this time, by the time he's come back to Rome, he must have felt the opposition. He sees everything's falling apart. He sees that Rome's been bombed, and he himself, now it appears to me, and this is not what traditional history will tell you, but it seems to me as though he now wants his way out. That's why he convoked the Fascist Grand Council. An order of the day was produced by someone called Dino Grandi. Now, the order case, it was to be they were going to be talking about the replacement of Mussolini. And not only that, but Mussolini actually knew what the order of the day was going to be. It had been shown to him by one of the attendees, and he'd obviously happily gone along with it. Now, there was a second order of the day which had suggested, hello Annie, that suggested that that the power should be put in the hands of the fascist party. Now, so a meeting was convoked at Palazzo Venezia in Rome at 1700 hours on the 24th of July 1943. Mussolini chose the place and he chose the time. It was held in what's called the Parrot Room, presumably because parrots had once been kept in there. It was a U-shaped table. Mussolini was at one end, at the bottom end, the curvy bit of the U, and he had a table that Mussolini should be replaced. And one person that voted against him was his own son-in-law, Count Galeazzo Ciano. Now, Mussolini had this meeting went on until 2:45 the following morning, and there had been those that said, let's have a break. But someone else said, no, Italian troops are dying whilst we're happily sleeping in our bed. No, we're going to finish this now. So the following day, though, Mussolini just treated this as well, the Fascist Grand Council has no right to sack me. Only the king can do that. And he'd arranged a meeting with the king for 1700 hours the following day. Now, the king had been informed of what was going on, and he was with the plan to get rid of Mussolini and to replace him with somebody else. Mussolini turned up at the king's place at 1700. He was there for only around 20 minutes. We've got Mussolini's own report. He wrote this a year later, and we also have the report of the wife of the king as well, so as to what she'd been told had actually happened. And so Mussolini gave a short report of his meeting with Hitler, and then they got onto the subject of the Grand Council. The king more or less cut him off and said that he was dismissing him, that Marshal Badoglio was going to take his place, and that was it. And he asked him not to cause a fuss or any bother. Now, at this moment, Mussolini was dismissed. He was walking out the steps of the palace. Now, he had a car normally, but his car had been sent round the back because they thought the meeting was going to be a bit longer. He comes out, there's nothing there except for some guards. An ambulance comes up, and somebody gets out the ambulance, goes up to him and says that, please, Duce, sorry, no, didn't say Duce, please, Your Excellency, please come with me, and we want to we want to protect you from the crowd. And so they put him in the ambulance. Mussolini went along with this. He thought they had guns. He didn't. Hello, Noel. And he was driven off. And indeed, whilst being driven off, it was driven off at such a speed that he had to request the driver to slow down a bit because he thought he was going to knock someone over or smash them all up. Mussolini was taken to a military barracks. He was kept waiting for an hour whilst they decided what to do to him, and then he was taken to the island of Ponza, which curiously enough had been a prison where lots of anti-fascists had found themselves. Noted in Roman times as being a prison for at least 2,000 years. Anyway, right, so it couldn't happen in the case of Hitler either, because there was nobody above Hitler. There was no royal family, and there was no king, and there's no king in Russia today. So unfortunately, in that case, history will not repeat itself. But that is what happened 80 years ago today in Italy. The war was lost, and Mussolini had to go. So. Right, okay then. So, well, thanks very much for those of you listen to Annie and Noel Apke, and Colin said he's not here, and Apke says, well, maybe there was a secret Hitler's boss called Super Hitler. Well, yes, there could have been. Who knows? Right, so I hope you found that interesting, and so I've got another. If I see you later, Annie. There'll be another video in an hour's time. That's on the other channel, and but for the moment, thanks for being here, and all the best from me in Poland. Bye for now.